Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Radio KBE. This episode we're going to talk about Talen Horton-Tucker, the mystery man or the mystery player on our team, who's been sort of up and down in his career, and Lakers have high hopes for him, and there's a lot of surprisingly we haven't talked about him very much, but there's a lot of, I think, expectation behind his growth and his trajectory. And this episode is just to sort of talk about how he fits in with, how he fits or he doesn't fit in with this 4-out philosophy that Darvin Ham is going to sort of be implementing with the Lakers. And then also on top of that, just kind of what his future probably looks like with this team when it comes to this sort of stuff. And just, I just want to share some thoughts in regards to it. But before I get into that, as always, I want to thank everybody for liking, sharing, subscribing. As always, it helps the channel, and I appreciate everybody immensely. Now, Talen is a player who has very interesting measurables. He's 6'4", 6'5", has very long wingspan, not really an above-the-rim athlete in the way that you traditionally think of them. He's much stronger when he has to sort of hold his ground. He's almost built like a heavy wing, but at the same time, he sort of has like the same limitations a heavy wing does. And one of the things that I think I was really hoping to see last season, and obviously he struggled a little bit with injuries too as well. Sprained his ankle. He had the surgery at the beginning of the year on his hand. There was a lot of strange stuff. Not strange, but just unfortunate stuff that went on with Talen last year, and he never really got, I would say, good footing. I mean, the offense last year was just a complete mess. So it didn't even matter just kind of what direction like anything was going to go in. Like I don't think there was anybody outside of LeBron who really had a good season, to be honest, offensively for the Lakers. And so Talen's one of those players where I think there's a lot more to his situation with the Lakers than people probably want to admit. It's I tried to make some mention of a lot of the stuff that was going on with him, and what I thought was some of the politics that were going on with not only him being returning to the Lakers in the off season, but just kind of how some of this stuff sort of shook out. And none of this is to his fault himself. It's very specifically in regard to a lot of it's dictated by the coach, who was Frank Vogel at the time, and then also by just kind of what the front office was doing with some of their offseason moves and stuff like that. So before I get into like his actual fit with Darvin Ham, I just want to sort of lay out what I think, and this is what I think is sort of going on with Talen and what's going on with his situation, and why we don't hear much about him anymore, to be honest. Like, we hear about Russ and whether the Russ fit's going to happen, but you hardly hear anybody talk about Talen's development, if he's developing, if he's not developing, what his situation's going to look like, that sort of stuff. It's almost as if he doesn't exist. The only time we ever talk about Talen is either if he's actually playing basketball, or if he's on the trade block. And for 2 seasons now, he's been on the block. His name has been heavily mentioned. And look, if you're a Laker fan, you know that role players get mentioned. Kuzma was mentioned every single year after his rookie season. Caruso didn't really get mentioned that much, but that was because he was on a very small contract. And then, you could Talen's case, he signed the new contract last year, so he was the natural, outside of Russ, he was going to be the natural option because Kendrick Nunn, had no value since he hadn't played a single minute. So, that being the case, when the Lakers decided to bring back Talen, which was fine, there was no issues with that, the way they went about sort of doing it was a little confusing. Talen had a Gilbert Arenas provision because he was a second-round pick, which meant that the Lakers could only offer him, no team in the league could offer him more than a certain amount of money. And this was 2 seasons ago, or prior to the offseason, this was a big point of conversation. That if the Lakers thought that Talen could be the guy that they thought he could be, then in restricted free agency, there may be a team out there that could offer him the maximum of $10 million for his first and second year of a new contract, which is what the Lakers did, and then max him out for his third and fourth year, and then the Lakers would have to decide whether they were going to match it or not. And the Lakers ended up bringing him back, and they ended up giving him $10 million a year, and as a result, they ended up letting Alex Caruso go. And a lot of people, I think, mistakenly look at the Russ trade, and they say that, well, because we traded for Russ, we let go of Alex Caruso, or they try to do this they try to indirectly blame the Russ trade for Alex Caruso being let go. And I don't think that's how that decision was made, because there's nothing that Alex Caruso did that they thought Russ would do. Like, Alex was a very, very defensive-minded player, very, his frame, Alex's physical frame, his physical profile is probably pretty close to Talen's physical profile in terms of the way that they were expected to play. I don't think the Lakers had any illusions that Russ was going to take over Alex's role, or be able to supplant or supplement some of what Alex's role was. And I think Laker fans mistakenly blamed that trade for Alex Caruso it being let go. And I'm not saying that Talen's the reason that Alex Caruso got let go. I'm not blaming Talen for the reason for why Alex Caruso got let go. But I think our front office specifically made a decision to bring back Talen because they thought he could replace what Alex Caruso did for the Lakers. Talen has the same strength profile that Alex Caruso does. He is not a very good off-ball defender. He falls asleep a lot continually. Russ does the same thing, so Malik does the same thing. So it's a common thing for undisciplined defenders for when they do stuff like that. But you could see in the physical profile where him and Alex lined up a little bit more. They're a little bit more in line with what it was. And Talen is a much more gifted offensive player than Caruso was. He's excellent at getting to the rim. And he's good at finishing too, as long as teams aren't sitting on his right hand or something like that. He has nice counter moves and stuff like that too that he goes to from time to time. But Talen's still a very raw player on both ends of the court. He's still a very young player too at the same time. So there shouldn't be any expectation for him to have polish. But when we brought him back, I honestly think that the Lakers made when they brought him back and they let Caruso walk, I think those two decisions were tied close to each other. I think the way that the front office tried to spin it to fans is that letting Alex Caruso walk was so that they could keep a guy like Talen. In reality, we had bird rights to Alex, so we could have kept him. There was no limit to us spending him. I just believe our front office, Rob Pelinka, Kurt Rambis, I don't think that they saw value in Alex Caruso, basketball value in Alex Caruso. And I think that is the reason why he wasn't retained. I don't think it has anything to do with tax. I think some of it has to do because of tax, but I don't think it has anything to do with the Russ trade. I think they just saw two players and they said, we think these two guys are pretty close to each other. We're going to take this guy because, and again, I don't blame the agency. I don't blame the player. I don't blame anybody else. Talen is clutch, and LeBron is clutch, and Anthony Davis is clutch, and Rich Paul has essentially functioned in the same way for Rob Pelinka that Rob Pelinka did for Mitch Kupchak. Whenever the Lakers needed role players or guys to fill in very small veteran style roles, Rob Pelinka, because he was Kobe's agent, Mitch Kupchak would lean on him, and he would send clients in the Lakers' direction that could fill some of those roles. Not saying that was the difference between winning a championship or not, but that was the nature of the relationship that used to go on. Rich Paul essentially functions in that same manner for the Lakers. Obviously, the premier clients are Anthony Davis and Braun, but there's a reason why we keep getting these role players from that are clutch clients or former clutch clients, right? Like Markieff Morris, Dion Waiters, us drafting Talen Horton-Tucker, KCP. We grab all these, Montrezl Harrell. If you've noticed, a lot of these role players that the Lakers keep landing, they're being not steered, but the Lakers are a willing landing spot for those role players, even if it costs, even if their market, in case their market value is soured across the league. And then that's just something that matters with, it's good practice to have if you have extra roster spots and if the player makes sense for your franchise. I think this year, though, it bit the Lakers in the butt, because I don't want to say they made the wrong choice, because they should have kept both of them. They should have kept Alex and retained Talen and figured it out from there. But they clearly tried to choose one or the other and to spin it to fans in that manner. But the thing that, and what made things worse is that Talen got hurt. He hurt his hand and he wasn't able to play. And then when Talen comes back, we're in the situation where we're trying to, Russ is already trying to figure out, and mind you, by the time Talen comes back, Anthony Davis and LeBron have been in and out of the lineup, right? And we know that Frank Vogel's not very good at figuring out offensive roles and that sort of stuff. So it almost seems as though they're just throwing guys out there. Vogel was throwing guys out there and hoping to see what would stick. So we would see lineups with Talen playing and Russ playing, and then there'd be another small guard like Rondo or something like that on the floor. Or you would see lineups where it'd be Russ, Talen, and LeBron on the floor, and then you would just see two guys in both Talen and Russ deferring to LeBron. But then if LeBron's physically tired, then it was too confusing. And I think a lot of that worked against Talen's favor. And for fans, I think fans put Talen and Russ together, and they said, well, this guy does this better at a fraction of the cost than what Russ does. But I don't think Talen has some of the same strengths that Russ has. And that's, so the reason I'm bringing all this stuff up is because he's been getting shopped, but so I'm not quite sure that he's part of this franchise's future. I wouldn't be surprised if Talen is moved in this offseason. I also wouldn't be surprised if Darvin Ham believes he can get more out of Talen, but for the sake of just the kind of depth that we need and the amount of redundancy that we have in our lineups, I'm not sure what Talen's future is with the Lakers. And I've talked to a few folks internally and stuff like that, and I, just kind of talked about what fit looks like. And the word that keeps coming up for me is sort of redundancy. The Lakers are going to have Kendrick Nunn on this roster, and if he's back 100% fully healthy, how are you fitting in Kendrick Nunn, Talen Horton-Tucker, and Russ at the same time? And, this is not me advocating for one over the other or any of the three over each other, but Darvin Ham has talked pretty positively about Russ, that he believes that he can get good good stuff out of him. And so if he's publicly, and I don't know if he's going to be on this roster, but if he is, how do you fit all those guys in there? And Russ is 6'3", Kendrick Nunn is 6'5", 6'4", 6'5", and then on top of that, Talen himself is 6'4", 6'5", and then the Lakers may potentially want to bring back a guy like Malik Monk, and then you have another young guy in Austin Reeves who's also really good. It would probably need minutes, and so again, we're running into this situation where we have a glut of guards that are just not there. They're not going to necessarily be the guys that they may not get the major minutes. And if Russ is on the roster, it makes it even more difficult. Even if you trade Russ and you bring back Malcolm Brogdon and Buddy Hield, how many minutes is Talen really getting? If Malcolm Brogdon and Buddy Hield are on the roster and then you have LeBron and AD, where are the shots coming? When is Talen going to get his touches, right? You can make sense out of it for a guy like Kendrick Nunn because he's only getting paid $5 million. He's probably just going to stand around and play 3-and-D and that sort of stuff. But Talen's not a 3-and-D player. He's not a good three-point shooter. The very quality that he has that he's probably best at is getting to the rim. Well, if LeBron's the guy that's going to be getting to the rim, or if Anthony Davis is the guy that's going to be attacking the rim in this 4-out, 1-in system, when does Talen get those opportunities? If Malcolm Brogdon or Gordon Hayward. So you guys sort of get what I'm trying to get at. Talen needs to be in a place where he has the opportunity to get his touches, get his reps, get his minutes. And you sort of see that situation with a team like the Warriors. You see it with Jordan Poole, and on Twitter you'll see Warrior fans, Laker fans compare those two together. But Talen clearly has the ability to get to the rim and score. Like, he's very, very good at that. And when he's on and making his jump shots, he can be a very productive offensive player. His defense is, he's not good at navigating screens. He gets buried on screens for a guy his size. And again, it's just because his physical profile is like a wing, like a heavy wing. And so when he gets hit by screens, it's hard for him because of the way he's just not a skill that he has. His screen navigation and his screen shedding technique is not good. But those are all things that he needs time to work on. So are the Lakers the team that is best for him to work on? Or does it make more sense maybe to move Talen to a team, that just gives him an opportunity to succeed as a sixth man role, and to collect his stats, because he has a player option for $10 million, and exactly like Kuzma and exactly like KCP, that he took that in that manner. So the thing that the Lakers have done, and it's something that I've tried to tell people, is that if you for players like Kuzma, for players like Pope, for guys like Talen, who may not necessarily be stars or all-stars, who are more likely to have a career path that's a little bit closer to, being like a solid role player for a long time, those guys need touches or an opportunity to maximize their salary. Just look at Alex Caruso. Alex Caruso should have been an all-defensive candidate player last year. Not with the Bulls, but the before we let him walk, because the Lakers had the number one defense. But those opportunities just were far and few for him because he was mainly a defensive guy, and we never leaned on him for offensive stuff. That wasn't part of the scheme. We had Dennis Schroeder, we had a KCP, we had other guys. So even when LeBron and AD were out, he wasn't getting offensive touches like that. There was nothing called for him. And whether it was his strength or not, you kind of get the idea that I'm getting to. Talen's more offensively gifted, so he has to get touches somewhere. And the thing is that in Darvin Ham's offense, it's not an equal opportunity offense, right? This is not a just everybody take their turn and you can get your shots and you can get what you want, and that's just not how it works. And Ham's offense is going to have more structure. If you watch the Bucks, the structure of that team is very straightforward, and the reason for that is because it helps build good habits. People understand what their roles are, and there's no confusion about it. Last year with the Lakers offense, the Lakers offense just anybody do whatever. Like, that's basically what it was. There was no structure to it. And as a side note, I think Ham's offensive philosophy, even if we bring back Russ, I honestly think it's going to be better. I think it's a much more modern, it's a much more structured philosophy. So I 100% understand the people that don't think it's going to work. I've seen a lot of people say that they're just going to punt, the Lakers are going to punt their season because Russ is still on this roster. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understand why people feel that way about that. But I think Ham's structure will help the offense a lot because it was so random last year. So if we know Talen's strengths are sort of not redundant, but if they overlap too much with what other guys on the roster or other prospective guys on the roster that are on, I'm not quite sure that he's going to be on this roster for much longer. And what also sort of kind of makes me think that is just the history. The Lakers historically have churned role players like they're, I don't even know what a good analogy for something like this is, but it's just they churn role players like crazy. They don't value role players. And it's actually something that I think that it has to change. The Lakers actually have to change the way that they approach this, because I think role players, and if you're watching the playoffs, Boston versus the Warriors, you've seen games like Andrew Wiggins. He's technically not a role player, but he's a role player within the Warriors offense. They just won Game 5 because Andrew Wiggins was able to get himself very, very easy looks off of all the attention that Steph and Clay gather. Like Draymond Green is able to get a few easy dunks or layups to the rim off of dribble handoff fakes because of it. And that's been the difference between them losing, the Warriors losing some games and winning some games. Same thing for Boston. Like you've seen games where if the role players hit their wide open threes, they're going to win. Like they look like they're unbeatable. And then when they are missing wide open shots, for whatever reason, like they struggle. And then their stars struggle because it's easier to play defense against them. So it's like the role players do matter. But the Lakers historically have never valued role players like that. And Alex Caruso is a perfect example of that. They've never valued them. And there's no better example of a player who came up through your system, was groomed by your G League scouts, was identified by your G League scouts, groomed by them, made it to the parent team, didn't get heavy minutes, but in the minutes that he was in was impactful, gradually increased his profile to the point where he was getting 20 minutes a game. Granted, Caruso would get hurt here and then. Usually really good defenders do tend to get hurt because they'll get elbowed in the face or, they'll get tripped or they get hammered on screens or whatever it is. But he got all the way to the point where that very same player started Game 6 of the NBA Finals. And, you won a championship with him starting. And that example, to go from a G League player all the way up in that point, and you're going to see that example if the Warriors win. You're seeing that same exact example with Gary Payton II, doing that same exact thing. Like he's closing games over Jordan Poole, the guy that the Warriors drafted, and Jordan Poole is taking the lead, but Jordan Poole isn't even closing games. It's Gary Payton II because role players matter, and a coach that understands how to play certain role players, that matters too as well. But that's the point that I'm trying to make. Like, the Lakers don't value role players. And I think Talen is going to be a casualty to that as well, even though he is clutch and that sort of thing. I think Talen getting the contract that he got, even though from a basketball value standpoint, it should have probably gone to Alex Caruso last offseason. Again, they shouldn't have been compared to. I'm not comparing them to each other as if it's you had to choose one or the other. They should have never had to. The Lakers should have never had been in a position where they had to choose one or the other. They should have both been retained, just because it's smart asset management, even if you're not going to keep one of them in the future. But you look and see what happens with Caruso. I can't imagine that the Lakers are looking at Talen and saying, "Oh, we have to keep him." Because we don't know what the development plan is for a player like him. I have no clue what Talen's role is going to be in Ham's offense. I have no clue what the goal is for him, like, to improve on. Like, we've always thought that, if his next step would be to work on the mid-range or a floater or get better at the three ball. And to some degree he has, but that's not, you could tell it's not natural to him. Like a catch and shoot three is it doesn't come to him like that. And, the point of this episode is not to talk about, I don't want to be negative about what he is, but because it may take longer for him, it's not just the amount of time that it would take for him to get better as a player. The other thing also is he needs the reps to do that. Like Caruso is like an off-ball player, like Gary Payton II. He just cuts and, makes defensive plays, runs the lanes in transition, advances the ball. Very simple stuff. But Talen's not that player. He's not that type of player. And if he's not that type of player, then he has to get his touches. And you're not going to get your touches, even if Russ isn't on the team. You're not getting your touches behind LeBron James and Anthony Davis. You're just not. So unless the Lakers plan on moving Russ and bringing back only 3-and-D catch and shoot type of guys, and Talen takes over full point guard duties, which may happen, I don't know what direction they're going to go in, then that's fine. But then you still have a logjam. You still have Malik that they want to bring back, Austin Reeves, who probably showed the best promise out of a lot of the players on the team, and then you'll have Kendrick Nunn if he's still also on the team as well. So how does that all work? And what about the times where, if Ham decides that he wants LeBron to be the point guard for a few minutes, and then they decide to go big and play a bunch of wing guys if they grab a bunch of wing guys on the market. So you could see like where it's hard to just kind of figure out how Talen fits in and what his future looks like with this team. And so that's why I think, and again, I'm not advocating for it, but I think what's going to eventually happen is I think Talen is going to get traded. I think the reason that we've heard about him being on the trade block is because he is a $10 million salary. I think it's also because he does have some value, because he's also an expiring contract more or less because of his player option next year. But at the same time, and his player option is only $10 million, so a lot of people are thinking to themselves, well, you know what, it's gonna automatically be like, he's gonna opt into the $10 million. Like he may not. Somebody may offer him, like $324, like $8 million a year, and he may take it because that's $24 million more guaranteed money with a better role. So he may not necessarily opt into that $10 million player option. But I think the Lakers are trying to find him a destination. And I think if the Lakers are smart, and if Rob is smart, and that's a big if, because I don't know how Rob goes about figuring this sort of stuff out. I think they're probably going to try and flip Talen for 1 or 2 3-and-D type of guys on the roster. Obviously, 3-and-D wing players are going to be at a premium. And so that's something that's going to be very interesting to see, like kind of whether they do it, they don't do it, that sort of thing, like which teams are going to bite and stuff like that. But, if there are teams out there that are also looking to shed salary, again, they have a guy that's on a 3-year contract and Talen potentially, is it expiring for them? He may become available. And so the guy I sort of think of, that's like a very simple swap is like trading him for somebody like Terrence Ross. And, Ross would naturally slot in to maybe the starting 2-guard position as a 3-and-D guy for the Lakers. What I'd like the Lakers to do, to be honest, is to see if they can break Talen's contract down into 2 players. So, like one of the suggestions that I've had, or one of the players I've thought about, maybe the Lakers should try and target. There's are guys that are second draft candidates, right? And so these are guys that got drafted by a team, played decent minutes, but then they've kind of bounced around the league because they can't find a steady role or steady offense and stuff like that. So there are teams out there that sort of have guys that are in sort of these positions that I'm just kind of keeping my eye on. And mind you, like the Lakers can always turn around and combine Talen and my last episode I suggested that they could take Talen and Kendrick Nunn and they could combine their contracts together and then try and go after a guy like Bogdanovich or a guy like Evan Fournier. But if they don't want to do that, if they want to go in the opposite direction, if they want to try and break it out for more depth, for the guys that would be the 7th, 8th, 9th, or the 8th, 9th, 10th guys on the core roster. Maybe because they feel like Stanley's not quite there yet, or Wenyen Gabriel's not quite there yet, and they need guys that are a little bit more established veterans. Like going to a team like the Kings and asking the Kings about, asking them if they're interested in trading Trey Lyles, if they're interested in trading Maurice Harkless, if they're interested in trading Justin Holiday. Like those are all guys that have very small salaries. Like you could trade Talen for, say, Trey Lyles, Mo Harkless, and actually I think Justin Holiday. You could probably trade for all 3 of those guys in a 1-for-3 trade. Maybe you don't have to offer additional picks or whatever it is. Lakers can add 3 able bodies. Like I don't know what direction that the Kings are going in. Maybe they want a clear, dedicated, backup scorer. If they're going to play De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell together in the backcourt or something like that, they want Talen to come on and be the 6th man. So like again, these is just me floating ideas, but I think that salary, if the Lakers don't use him to aggregate up into a starting 2-guard that can play, 30 to 35 minutes a game. Aggregating down the other way is something that they can do with him. But again, moving him is exactly the goal should be exactly the same that is with Russ. What's going to make this team significantly better is already having a better coach. Darvin Ham is a great coach, so I'm not worried about him. I think cleaning up the stuff that we're doing offensively and defensively to be more of a modern style basketball team is going to go a long way for the Lakers. The second thing is players hopefully staying healthy will go a long way too. But in the same way that we talk about, Laker fans talk about if we trade Russ, I'm not of the mind that we should trade Russ just for anything, like the John Wall or something. That's a horrendous trade idea. I don't think the Lakers should do that. If you're going to trade him, whether it's Talen or Russ, it has to be for guys that fit within Ham's philosophy better, not just for anything, because then you're just kind of doing a bunch of nonsense without any vision or any cohesiveness. And I think that sabotages Darvin Ham more than anything when you just make a trade for the sake of making a trade just to say, here, I did it. So I don't know, ultimately what's going to happen with Talen. And in Ham's offense, I could see him succeeding to some degree in a 4-out offense. The only difficult part is if you're trying to play him and Russ together or him, Russ, and Braun together, it gets really shaky because there were too many times last season where Russ would drive and attack and Talen would be left wide open because teams knew he couldn't shoot, and Russ would kick it to him wide open and then Talen wouldn't take the three and he would drive directly into the lane after Russ exited the lane, drive right back into the paint. So it would be like, it's almost like a hamster wheel. Like they'd just be doing the same thing, like a whirling dervish or whatever. And so that's my concern. That Ham's philosophy, like somebody has to be willing to take the shot, right? And we can't have two guys that aren't willing. Russ is willing to do it, but he's not going to do it if he's not making the shot. And that's probably not the best way to use him as a guy to finish plays. You want him to be the first guy that attacks the rim because he can still get to the rim at an elite level and find whoever the open guy is. We just never ran that other than like the Charlotte game maybe in Charlotte. And so Talen's fit and his future, regardless of whether Russ is on this roster, is going to be very interesting to see. I don't know what direction the Lakers are necessarily going to go in. Just kind of seeing the stuff, Ham being very positive about Russ. The fact that Russ has been available, like he's actually available to play games, I think a lot of the Lakers' decision-making from the front office standpoint is not just about, building the best team. It's also trying to have a healthy team. And I think I think that's why you're hearing so much positive stuff about Russ, because Russ is available. Like, as much as people don't like his shooting ability and stuff like that, like, he's playing games. And for, like, everybody that thinks that, we would just be better off trading him for almost anything and it would be better than what we have him for. Yeah, that doesn't work if the player doesn't play. Like, if you trade him for Malcolm Brogdon and Malcolm Brogdon can't play more than 40 or 50 games, that's 32 games that you're not getting a player. That's a problem. And that's not a problem that's just an issue for the Lakers. It's a problem for everybody in the league. Like, availability matters, and the pace that players play at and stuff like that can affect it. And again, like, people who constantly say that, like, if Russ is on this roster, they're punting the season. Well, I mean, frankly, whether Russ was on this roster or not, if LeBron gets hurt, our season is done, like, for an extended period of time. If Anthony Davis gets hurt again, our season takes a serious hit, regardless of who's on our roster. So it's like that sort of stuff it never means anything in the grand scheme of things, because all it takes is one person to get knocked out and for it not to work. So I'm going to be curious to see whether the Lakers aggregate up or aggregate down. And I think part of what's going to drive this decision for the Lakers is what the opportunity is on the market. If there's somebody out there that wants Talen, that it doesn't cost the Lakers anything to trade them. Same thing for same logic with Russ. And I think the other thing that's going to also influence this decision too, to some degree, is Kendrick Nunn. Like, if the Lakers think that Kendrick Nunn is a better fit for the role that Talen is going to eventually play, that they expect that of Talen, maybe the sixth man sort of role for the Lakers, that in itself could be something that, you know, spells his time here for the Lakers. And so I'll be curious to see what it is. And you know, I just want to talk about it because I haven't really heard too many people talk about it. You know, the entire conversation all season has been about off season. It was about, you know, has been about Russ, obviously, for obvious reasons, and it's been about you know, Anthony Davis staying healthy, LeBron staying healthy, that sort of thing. But for a guy that, you know, we were pretty high on, he's been getting shopped around repeatedly and you know, obviously because of his salary. So it's just like, where do we go from here? Like, what direction do the Lakers go in? Do they just try to make the entire roster work? And also on top of that, you know, when Talen was out, we did get a good look at Malik. We did get a good look at Austin Reeves, and those guys did function pretty well with you know, LeBron and AD, or Russ and LeBron. Like, there were a lot of good moments. Obviously, they didn't result in wins, and they do have their flaws, but there were a lot of good moments, and both those guys, Malik and Austin, naturally fit in to sort of the roles that you want them to be in. And you can see how, you know, they can be guys. Austin Reeves as a connecting player, and Malik as a guy who just knocks down threes, wide open threes over and over again. You can see how they fit in a Darvin Ham offense. So I'm going to be really curious to see what direction the Lakers go in with Talen and just kind of what it is. And but I won't be surprised. I won't be surprised if he's moved. I won't be surprised if Russ is moved. I don't know what the you know, what the market will say and stuff like that. But, you know, if he's on the team, if he's not on the team, I hope he does get the touches that he needs to be successful, because he has NBA talent and he has NBA skill. He's just not getting the reps that he needs. Like, he needs to go somewhere where he can learn to grow the other parts of his game. And I just don't think it's going to be possible with this Lakers team. And I may be completely wrong. And if anything, if he's on this roster, I hope I'm completely wrong, because then that means that something good happened, and my prediction was completely off, or my expectation was completely off. So, as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you can like, subscribe, it'll help the channel a lot. I hope some of this dialogue about Talen and just kind of where he's at, you know, provides some clarity and some thought about, you know, what may happen in this offseason with him, and just kind of what direction the Lakers should probably consider going in if they do decide to move him. So as always, I appreciate you guys watching and tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next video.